This is the Marketing Podcast Network.
Stories influence, teach, and inspire us. But what about the storytellers who create them? Uncorking a Story profiles storytellers to uncover how their background and life experiences influence the stories they create. We learn what motivates them, their path to success, and what fuels them to keep creating. It all starts by asking one simple question: where does your story begin? Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Now here's your host, Mike Carlin.
Hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm excited to introduce you to Pattiann Rogers. Pattiann has published 15 collections of poetry and 2 book-length essay collections: The Dream of the Marsh, Wren, and The Grand Array, Writings on Nature, Science, and Spirit. She is the recipient of 2 NEA grants, a Guggenheim Fellowship, that sounds fancy, a 2005 Literary Award in Poetry from the Lannan Foundation, and the Distinguished Alumni Award from the University of Missouri College of Arts and Sciences. I should say arts and sciences, not arts and scientists, but you never know. In 2019, she was awarded the John Burroughs Medal for Lifetime Achievement in Nature Poetry, and she joins me today on Uncorking a Story to talk about her latest collection, Flickering. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Pattiann.
Well, okay, thank you. I think I'll start in my childhood, and then we can develop how I became a poet. And people think they can write poetry. Everybody writes it, and I have people think I taught at graduate students in creative writing who want to be poets or are trying to be, and some that come into the class are taking it because they'll think it'll be easy. Everybody can write a short. Well, we can talk about whole poetry a little bit later.
I'm curious to know, where does your story begin? Just tell me. Let's start off by talking about you.
Okay. I was brought up in Joplin, Missouri, and lived there for 20 years, and then went to the University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri. And we lived in a modest house on a street that was not paved, was not finished, and was a wonderful house to me. And about a block and a half, we had no sidewalk in front of our house. About a block and a half down the street was where it ended. Our street ended in a hardwood forest. And in Missouri, the landscape is rocky and it has hills. And we had orange streets because there's a lot of iron in the soil. Anyway, the neighborhood kids like to go down in that forest. And it had a small creek in it and lots of big boulders you could climb up on and jump off of. And there was never anybody down there doing anything. It was just a wild forest. And some of the mothers in our neighborhood would not let their children go down. But my mother never gave a notion that she had any fear of anything that I would go on down there. And so I went with a friend or two, and we just walked around and we looked at things and we watched the crawdads trying to skitter under their leaves in the stream. And so every once in a while we'd get a surprise. And one of the surprises that stays with me, I remember because it was frightening. We were down there among the trees by the creek, and we could hear rustling in the leaves and the grasses. And I was afraid to go up there to see what it was that was rustling there. And there was a boy down there older than some of the rest of us. And he said he'd go up and see what it was. And so he went up there. And after he saw what it was, we weren't that afraid but we still didn't know what it was, really. It was the tail of a lizard.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I thought, oh my gosh, why is this happening? This type of lizard, if it was caught, if a predator was chasing it and it got caught and caught by its tail, it could release its tail. And so there was no blood, there was nothing. There's just this. Anyway, I never forgot that because I was afraid. And then I was amazed at this wonderful thing that the lizard had. When it got caught, it could just release its tail and run off without its tail.
Yeah,
Anyway.
Interesting evolutionary development for that lizard.
Yeah. Yeah. And that led into my interest when we got into the biology classes and zoology classes. It stayed with me and other things too, because there were wildflowers there, and I always tried to take a flower to my mother. And then the wild onions, I always begged her to cook them. And I don't know if she ever did. Anyway, so I wasn't afraid of it. I loved it. I loved to go down. And we had a lot of fun. And if we were never with an adult to interfere our feelings about things.
Yeah.
And as I got a year or three older, if I got mad at my mother or somebody in the family, I always thought, I'm going to go down in the woods and I'm going to live there. So I packed my suitcase one time, but that didn't develop. But it was like a kind of freedom that I could go into that woods. I could look at what I wanted to look at for as long as I wanted to look at it. And so that has stayed with me.
Yeah.
And on into college. And I had a minor in zoology, but I also was very interested in English literature and American literature. And this is another experience I had that stayed with me and in the same way as the lizard's tail. And that is that my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Garla, read us a poem by Longfellow. And in this poem, it's a metaphor. And none of us knew what a metaphor was in the fourth grade in Joplin, Missouri. And she told us, she read us the poem, and then she explained it to us. And she says, this is a metaphor. You are talking about one thing when you're really illustrating another thing. And I thought, what in the world? How can you do that? And to me, it was some kind of, it was bordering on magic, some kind of magic thing that you could do to write that way. And I could read his poem, but I don't know how much time we have. And it's called I Shot an Arrow into the Air. Have you ever heard that poem?
It's ringing a bell. It's ringing a bell.
I think maybe you were in the fourth grade too once. Anyway, it's simple. It's a simple poem, and it's not hard to understand it, but it just seemed like a miraculous thing. You could do that. And that feeling has hung with me all the way up to wanting to write poetry, because it really is a freedom. You can say anything you want to say if you say it beautifully enough, but nothing. And at that time, the kids were all saying things like, when you live in America, you can say anything you want to say. Just a little bit over the edge, but it's always, if you got somebody come in your yard and you don't want to play with them, you say, get out of my yard. And they say, this is a free country. I don't have to get out of your yard. Anyway, that's the kind of thing we were brought up with. And that freedom was something good and to be used and for good. And actually poetry has, I think, still remains developing and saying things that nobody has ever said before, but has ring to it that makes you think there's something there. I'm going to keep that word. And also our vocabulary here in English is science is the same way. Science gives us wide vocabulary. And natural history workers or students, when the country was developing, they had to give names to things because they didn't have names yet. Some of the birds didn't have names. And so Audubon gave them words. I keep looking at you.
Tell me, when between the time when you were in fourth grade and you heard that poem from Longfellow to the time when you started writing poetry, about how much time had passed?
It's always been a hard thing for me to say. Even as I had books from, I was still hesitant to call myself a poet. It just seemed like trying to name yourself a king or something. And so I am a poet now. And I didn't try to write on my own or show somebody that was not a teacher a poem. But I took a summer school class my year of graduation from high school, and an English class to get enough to allow me to be able to take another class during the fall semester. Anyway,
Yeah.
anyway. And she just had us write paragraphs. But the paragraph had to have an opening statement that would tell the reader what the subject was going to be. And then it had to have a development of some kind, and then a final statement, which would make an ending to the paragraph. So it wasn't really a poetry form. It wasn't a sonnet or in any of but it was contained by some fencing in. And I didn't find that hard. I found it wonderful. I love to write short little thing like that and have it, and I could accommodate what she wanted in the paragraph. So that was really my first real effort to write something, not poetry, but very near to it, having many of the restraints, which you find out once you can do them. They're not restraints at all. They're a structure that you can use. So anyway, I went to, I didn't have nobody in my high school. I didn't show the teachers or anybody anything I was writing as poetry. And I wanted to tell this. And by growing up, my brother was a musician. He was 5 years older than I was, and he could play the violin, clarinet, the piano, I don't know what the other things were. And he was the drum major, the leading, the orchestra student conductor of his high school, our high school orchestra. And so I had music around me all the time. And my mother used to give my brother a nickel for every morning he got up and practiced the piano before school. So I woke up to the piano, hearing piano music. And he was good. That's what the thing was. He was really good. And then he went to the University of Missouri and was not around in the house all the time. But my mother played the piano, and I played the flute and tried to play the piano, but it wasn't what I liked to do. And so, and when you write poetry and you don't want it to sound like prose, you have to know how not to sound like prose, or to be trying to be telling somebody something that they have to learn. or like a lecture. And what helps that is that poems are like song, and they don't have to have a accompaniment, but they do have to have a cadence that fits with. You have to you as poet can make the cadence up, but once you start that, you better adhere to it. Or I say I should. Anyway, I had a poetry semester in college with John Nyhart, who was a poet, not contemporary. He was writing at that time, but he was an elderly man who had lived with Indian nation. What was his tribe, John? Sioux. The Sioux Indians, and they gave him the name of a rainbow. Anyway, he could read a poem so that you could hear the music of it. And he also made us write, I wanted to do it, 2 poems a week. And they had to adhere to a very kind of strict structure. Not just, if I had my book here, I could tell you all the names of these different I can't think of the right name, but a poem that has a strict form to it. And he could read it, and he chanted it. And so I knew how to hear a poem, because I'd never even heard a published poet read a poem. And if they're good, they know pretty much how to read it so that you can pick up the tune, the movement of the poem. And it helps the understanding of a poem. And it's very helpful to writing a poem. If you have this going, if the word would some of them just fit, and you know it. And if you get to a line and it's bumpy, you know what's wrong. You've gotten out of the pace of it. So to me, it's what I wouldn't want to do anything else. And I said that once when I was giving a reading, and I had 2 young boys at home. Oh dear! But this is what I like about poetry is that children are poets. It doesn't bother them if they go chattering along, but they're singing, and they're saying words, and they usually stop after a while. And I had one son who gave me several titles for poems, because he was just talking, and they asked questions. And what I wanted to do with my poems was to answer questions that seem either ridiculous or not worthy working to understand. And that because I wanted to explore and find out what could happen if you get the right thing put together. And it's a real pleasure to do for me.
Let's talk about your latest collection. What can you share with us about Flickering?
This was really funny because this title was, when you are working on a manuscript, a new manuscript of poems, you usually don't title it until you get pretty almost finished, because you don't know exactly how everything is going to be going. And to write a new manuscript poem is about 3 years or 4. If you look at the contemporary poets, they have a new book coming out, usually between 4 and maybe 8 years or something. And let's see, where was I going with this? Oh, about the titles. And my son said, children always ask questions, and I always listen. I always listened and never laughed or said that's crazy or anything, and tried to use them in my poetry. Anyway, he said, "What would happen if a giant swallowed the earth?" That's the title of the poem. So I wrote, and I had that freedom feel. I could give it the answer that just seemed to strengthen the poem. And it was published in the journal Poetry, which is the oldest poetry journal that is published in America. And so it was really a lift for me because that was really something wonderful to get. And I have the editor of the Poetry take that poem and continue to take my poem. So I had a lot of support in that way. So that was lucky for me. As because I was in college, I went back. Let's see. I married my husband of now 60 years. Is that right? We have 63 years.
63. Congratulations.
Yeah, we did it. I have to tell you just a funny story because we were in French class together and we were sophomores at college. And he sat by a window, and then there was another boy, and then there was me, and then everybody else. And so our teacher, our professor, when she handed back our test papers, she would hand back the best one first, and then on down until the poor guys in the back were, she didn't seat them there. They got there. Anyway, John, my husband, always got his paper first and always got my paper second. And that was through the whole semester. And so when the semester was ending, our professor said, "John and Pattiann, I want to talk to you out in the hall." And then, oh my gosh, what's this about? And she said, "The head of the French department wants me to recommend or find two of my best students if they are interested in advanced French course." And John said, no, he wasn't interested. And I said, yes, I was interested.
Oh, you should have said we.
Yeah, no, he did it for me. He said, after I said yes, he said, yes, I'm interested. And she said, oh, good, you're interested. And John said yes. Pattiann said yes. I said yes. So let's go back in the room. So that was that. We hadn't even had a date. I didn't even know he, had any, what do you call it, aims toward me. Anyway, he did. And I guess we both each made it best choice. Only the French course wasn't as good as the first one because she was really a hard teacher.
I'm sure.
Anyway,
back to Flickering. I just want to make sure we can plug your collection here a little bit for the listeners of Uncorking a Story. Do you have a selected poem you'd like to entice our listeners with?
I could, and I do need that. I was heading for why it's called Flickering. It's because my lovely editor moved my due date up 3 months. I thought I had 3 more months to work on it. Anyway, don't say that because he's a good editor. But then anyway, so he said he liked it. He liked that type. Because I had just put it on there because I had to do something to get this written and in a shorter time period. And other people seemed to think they liked it. And my golly, it is a marvelous word. The same editor asked me to write an introduction. I'd already written 4 books with him. it was through a penguin. And so I knew how we went along, and he'd never asked me to write an introduction before. So I had my four most nearest, most recently written, didn't have an introduction. So I went ahead and did it. And as I wrote that introduction, this word got better and more interesting. And it could be a noun, it could be a pronoun, adverb, there's a bird of the woodpecker family is a flicker, and it's called Flicker. And my friend Flicka, novel, Flicka is a horse. This word is just everywhere.
It's very versatile.
And it's a happy little word. I thought it wasn't going to mean anything. And it went, my son is a professor at Northwest University. And I was trying to get him involved because I like science, and not many poets weren't writing about science, not about getting technically with it, but you read some of the things they have done and discover we all are amazed by it, but nobody writes a poem about it. So I preached on that every time I could, that if you could in these days see a fetus developing in the womb, it's got to have some kind of message to you in your body. You got to feel some way about that. And other things that are miraculous we not anymore, maybe. You need to give the people who are reading and living these things some kind of platform or language, actually, to talk about it. And so anyway, he and my editor at this point were really wonderful all the way through from this point, because we wanted to use, my son was working on the human brain, and he was taking microscopic photographs of the brain on a electrical kind of grid, so you could see these facts that are coming out. And lo and behold, he just said casually, I got our editor, I said, could my husband write something, my son, write something about the work he's doing, and we can can be the last thing in the book. And that's a small essay about because we had wanted to put the microscopic camera when it was taking as my son was taking photographs of what this electricity moving around the brain is doing. It made a beautiful art, not as beautiful as Hunter Biden. It's a kind of an artwork. And I wanted that for the cover of this book, And the designers of the book didn't want that. Had to think of something else. So 3 images, 3 photographs, and not of the same brain, but what they were seeing, and described it in this small, it's just 1-page essay, but he described it to the readers in each time, and then it had to be a black and white photograph. It was colored, but I didn't get that. I did get the page for him to have an essay in there. And I wanted that because poets don't, a lot of them, and they're doing better actually, but they don't think poets have anything that they're interested in particularly.
Pattiann, I would like to end with us hearing one of your poems. Would you mind? Would you mind reading one for us?
All right. I was just trying to think. If you let me read two, I've got a very short one that follows my dedication of the book.
Okay.
And when people say flickering, they normally think of a light, a flame. And I wasn't going to write about that, but I thought, oh, I think I should. So this is a very short poem, and it took lots of drafts, 30, I think. And the title of it is, Here's the Dedication, and then here's the poem.
Sure.
Okay. So the title is, For the Song Delivered and the Moments Left. Once I watched a flame flickering in a fire curled by rocks. It was singing in a melodic foreign language. The humming cadence of its quiet sizzle sounded occasionally as the flame was swaying, dimming, uttering a soft, breathy click, one castanet tap, then a rush of light, golden and alive with intention. A spark, a tiny sun, flew into the night. I watched the gesture, listening to the words, the flame faintly flickering still, becoming smaller, weaker, nearer to earth, transforming itself into a blue pearl, shining in ash at the root, not dead, not alive. It shivered once, shook itself into breath and out again into silence and disappeared. And I said, I understood everything.
Wow, that's beautiful. I can almost hear it flickering as you read that.
Thank you. Now, you gonna let me read another one?
I'll let you read one more and then we'll have to wrap up.
Okay. What would be the best one?
Maybe something in French.
No way. Let me see. See, I haven't read these enough to know what the audiences are going to think of.
The one where you find, we'll see yours.
Okay. This is not very long either. I have it. The contents are in sections. And this is the second section in the book. And it's called The Best of Bones. The Best of Bones. And I did read this actually in a bookstore last week. And it was people talked about and wanted to talk about. And when I give a reading, people like to know how did you come upon this? And I was going to have a x-ray made in the clinic. And I went into the x-ray room and there was a small skeleton hanging there. And I said to the x-ray person who was going to take the x-ray, why do you have a skeleton hanging up? It's not Halloween. And she says, I just love bones. I thought, I got to know what it's all about. So this is that section on bones. And the poem I'm going to read is called A Remnant. A Remnant. And this is after describing a lot of bones and stuff. That can be interesting also. Anyway, a remnant. Once as a child playing in our attic, I found a small ceramic box forgotten in the dark corner of a desk drawer. I unlatched the lid, carefully lifted the white tissue inside to reveal the complete skeleton of a small seahorse, lying as if sleeping on a bed of cotton. It was more beautiful, more finely intricate, and than any ornament of lace, more entrancing than any diamond or ruby rock could be. So far from the sea, I looked a long time, didn't touch, left it as it had been, closed the lid, whispered a word, lay the tiny casket away in the dark desk, shut the drawer to light, still hearing the cresting sea, still feeling the swell of its current. So there was that, and that was true.
Very good. Patty, thank you for joining me here on Uncorking a Story. The book, the collection is called Flickering. I imagine it is available wherever books are sold.
It's also narrated and available on Audible.
Oh, available as an audiobook. Very good. Patty, thank you. Pattiann, thank you for stopping by Uncorking a Story. Congratulations on Flickering, and I wish you all the best with it.
Thank you for listening and grinning. And I enjoyed it. Actually, I did. So I'll be watching for it, listening.
That's right. I will let your publicist know when it'll go up.
Good. Thank you. And I enjoyed it.
Thank you, Pattiann.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.